Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day 9 in our journey into the first letter that Paul wrote to the church in Corinth. Today I'm going to be looking at chapter 8. Paul starts off with a very interesting comment, and this is found in verse 1. He says, "Knowledge puffs up, while love builds up." Now that basically becomes the foundation for our introduction into chapter 8. Paul is comparing the value of knowledge against that of loving. And there seems to be a tremendous effort placed in the church there in Corinth to gain knowledge, to be knowledgeable about the things of God. But in their gaining knowledge, subtly without people knowing it, they became puffed up. And this did not benefit the church at all. Paul says, love builds up. We are called to love one another. And Paul was trying to say, if you really want to do something in order to establish the church, then you need to learn to love one another. Paul then also says that love has its origins, and the origin is in God, because God is love. And if we truly want to grow in love, we need to grow in a knowledge of the Father. I'm going to explain this now. But before I do that, there is also this saying that it is not what you know that counts, but who you know. And this is quite relevant to the next thought that Paul brings out in verse 3. He says, if you want to be known by God, you need to love God. Listen to what he says. Whoever loves God is known by God. Now, dear friends, that seems to be a basic measuring stick in general. If you want to be known by people, it is not the knowledge that's going to get you known by people, but in the way in which you treat them, the way in which you love them. And if you love God, you'll be known by God. If you love your fellow man, you will be known by your fellow man. Paul then also says that we need to understand this one thing, that our devotion needs to be centered in one place. And how do we start? By loving one another? Of course, by first loving God. And so I want you to notice that Paul says, and we find this in verse 6, there is but one God, which means again that our focal point is only on one God, not different gods or different lords. There is one God, easy to focus on. And he says, this God that we should be focusing on, that should be the desire of our hearts, that should be the focal point of our worship, is the Father. And then he makes this most beautiful statement about that. He says, from whom all things came. That means everything we see around us, even one another, even the knowledge we have regarding the things around us, comes from the Father. And then he says, for whom we live. Creation was brought into existence for the purpose of living to honor the Father. Just as David says, the heavens declare the glory of God. We were created to declare the glory of God. Paul then goes on to say that there is only one Lord, Jesus Christ. Then he says, through whom all things came. So everything we see around us, we are actually clearly told here that Christ brought all these things that he got from the Father into existence. And then again he says, if you truly want to live for the Father, then you do it, as he says there, through Christ. You live for the Father through Christ. So let me read this sentence as a whole. There is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came and for whom we live. And there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. You know, dear friends, knowledge is very important, but knowledge doesn't bring us closer to God. And Paul uses metaphorically the knowledge of food. In this particular case, it was to know if the food came from idol worship or if food didn't come from idol worship. And some people were making a big fuss about food. And there is this incredible fuss about food in the world nowadays. But I want you to notice this regarding knowledge. So it's not just knowledge about food. Regarding knowledge, Paul says in verse 8, but food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. Now I'm going to paraphrase this, and I'm going to use this just to round off the chapter. Paul is saying, knowledge is important, but it isn't the first value in God's eyes. Love is. And he says, so I'm paraphrasing now, but knowledge does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we have no knowledge, and we are no better if we do have knowledge. Have a lovely day. God bless you. Bye-bye.